This is the podcast for broadcast. Sound Off Podcast with Matt Kendall.
This week I speak with Kelly Alexander from Virgin Radio Montreal and 800 CJAD. Here's some words that come to mind when I think about Kelly. Fearless, innovative, team player. She also knows her audience, and she's got lots of different ones. For instance, there are many radio audiences she has because she works many day parts on different radio stations like Virgin Radio and CJAD. There's also her online audience that she's been building for well over 12 years. There's her website, kellyalexandershow.com, a YouTube channel, and 2 podcasts. Now, I have all that too, but hers is just more interesting. Kelly Alexander spoke to me from her home very early on a Sunday morning in the same town where she grew up.
I actually grew up just north of the city in a place called Terrebonne on a farm.
What was on the farm? Was it cattle or vegetables?
It was a lot going on. When I was little, my dad had 200 head of cattle. Also, there were some chickens going on and a few horses. And then we always had like a family dog, so that was cool. And some cats, of course, to keep out the mice out of the barn. So that was helpful. And then as we kind of got older, he shifted from cattle stuff. Like we still have cows, but they're more of like his pastime as opposed to the full-on thing, which is we actually grow turf grass for people's lawns and golf courses and all that kind of stuff. We actually, years back, our grass was actually on some of the F1 track in Montreal, so that was cool.
Growing up in Montreal, or at least near Montreal, means you're going to get a steady dose of radio in both English and French. Did you listen to both?
I mainly listened to English, and I remember like my first sort of memories of radio is being in the kitchen with my mom getting ready for school and hearing George Balkan on the air and wanting his job as like a 5-year-old. So that's where my love of radio started, because I just heard him on the air and I just thought he had the coolest job ever. I didn't really understand all of it, but I love that he was doing weather updates with, his with Ed Cowell and, sports with Ted Blackman, and then had these funny interviews, and he just had such a great personality, and he always made it seem like everything was okay with the world. So that seemed like a pretty good job to me.
On the digital, it should say 9:23 right now. 9:23 CJAD time. The George Balkan Breakfast Show. Friday morning between 9 and 10, we play requests. Those requests are phoned to us. We record them on Thursday usually, and that's the way we can have the music playing just as soon as the people say, I want to hear Lady in Red. So now you know some of the secrets of broadcasting. You too can be a star. 23 minutes past 9, and it's hot out there. I'll tell you where it's really hot. Is southbound on...
Did you ever get a chance to meet George Balkan?
I did years later when I became an intern at CJAD, and it was such a thrill. And he was so kind to me, which is, because I always say, like, don't meet your heroes or whatever. And he couldn't have been more kind and sweet. And I think I even kind of managed to blubber out that, I listened to you since I was 5 and whatever. And he was really kind about it. And I was really sad when he passed away, because it wasn't that long after that he retired and sort of passed away. So I still miss him. I still miss hearing his voice on the air.
When did you start working in radio?
So, all throughout high school and all that, I was kind of trying to figure out my life's path, if you will. And I knew radio was going to play a part in it because, like I said, from 5, I knew I wanted to be on the radio. And it was funny because in grade 9, I don't know if you had to do this, Matt, but they sent us off to student counselor or whatever. And they put us on this antiquated computer program. And you're supposed to punch in your likes. And it was going to tell you what job choice you should do. And so I'm not sure if it's because of my background of being farmer and then sort of really enjoying the outdoors and then also really loving music and dance and all that kind of stuff. It told me I should be either a forest ranger or a choreographer. So that was awesome. And that was unhelpful about most of all of it. So then I decided, I was like, well, you're going to have to figure this out on your own, kiddo. So I went off to Dawson College, and that's where I got my first radio show, CIXS. And it was life-changing for me because I always knew I wanted to be on the radio, but the moment I sat behind that microphone, it just was like all the bells and whistles went off. And from then on, I was bound and determined to figure out my path and how to get where I wanted to go.
Dawson College has actually yielded a few other Canadian broadcasters. I think Bradley Karp is one, and Stuntman Stu in Ottawa would be another.
I love Stuntman Stu. He's great. Yeah. So I didn't know he was a fellow Dawson Blue, so that's great.
Is your first radio gig over on Fort Street, working at CJAD and The Mix?
Yeah, would be as an intern. I was an intern for a guy named Toby Goodfellow, who the reason I am where I am now is because of Toby Goodfellow, who I adore to this day. And he was like in charge of the ops at CJAD, and I believe all of them for Mix and for Shom. What happened is I got in touch with him and wanted to become an intern, and he wasn't really taking interns at that time for like technical aspects, but for whatever reason he gave me a shot. So I was his intern. So I remember like pulling down the weather from Ed Cowell on carts, and I just thought it was like I was like, I can't believe I'm pulling down weather reports from Ed Cowell. I just thought it was the coolest thing. And I also ended up being on the street team, so that's where I met Matthew Wood and did a bunch of stuff that summer for the street team for CJAD and for Mix. And I just was like in my element. I was so happy. Then I became a call screener as well for the Ricky Sear show and a couple of other shows. And I think it was Kevin Holder actually who taught me how to call screen. So that happened. And then after that, I was going back to Ryerson because I was in the RTA program, Radio and Television Arts at Ryerson. So I was headed back to Toronto to finish up schooling. And because of my affiliation with Toby, he actually helped me get into CFRB in Toronto. Because of that, that was my first paid gig. I was a producer at CFRB, News Talk 1010.
So what's the Toronto experience like? And then I think you know what the next question is going to be because but what was the Toronto experience like? Super eye-opening, and just like I had the best time. Like I really loved being a part of the CFRB team. Like it was such a good foundation for me because learning how to be a good producer for a talk show has served me well as an announcer on an FM station. You learn how to chase, you learn how to find the guests that you need, you learn how to try to write compelling questions to get topics on the air. You know, you're trying to make sure your host is prepared and all that sort of stuff. So I am so grateful for my experience at CFRB, and I was able to be the producer for many amazing hosts, including Christina Chernesky, who I adore to this day, who's now out in Saskatchewan somewhere, Regina, I believe it is. No, Saskatoon. She would punch me if I said the wrong town. So Saskatoon, that's where she is. I was also the first producer for John Moore when he left Montreal to come up to CFRB. I was his first producer when he had the drive show from 3 to 6. And I remember it was funny because our program director at the time was a bit concerned about me being the producer for John because both John and I were super into entertainment, obviously. And I think he was concerned that I would be giving John a bunch of topics that was just entertainment related. And I said, no, just give me a chance. I know I can do this. And so he left us alone for a couple of weeks. And then there was no more talk of me not being the producer of the show. And it was great to work with John. I love John Moore. He's amazing. He's such a talent. He has such a way with words. And I learned a lot being his producer there. What's better, Montreal or Toronto? All my Toronto friends are going to be angry, possibly. Here's the thing. I really love being in Toronto. It's my second home. I just feel like there's something about Montreal. And it's funny because I remember once coming home from Ryerson on the train with a friend of mine. She was coming down for the weekend to hang out at the farm and all that sort of stuff and meet my family. And when we were headed back to Toronto at the end of the weekend, she's like, do you know that there's two of you? I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, there's a Toronto Kelly and there's a Montreal Kelly. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah. She's like, when you are in Toronto, you are focused, you are driven, you are like ready to rock. And she's like, when you are in Montreal, you just seem to relax more. She's like, I'm not sure if it's because it's your hometown or what, but you just seem more at peace. So I was like, wow. I feel like when I'm home in Montreal, there's something obviously about being close to the farm and my family. And then I just feel like here in Montreal, there's a good balance between work and play. And I think that's a great thing to have. But I really love Toronto and I hold it close to my heart always. I think your behavior in both cities accurately sums up both cities. Okay. One's a little more intense and the other one's a little more joie de vivre. So yeah, it's true. It's true. But I love Toronto and I'm such a proud grad of RTA. I'm so happy I went to that school. And a bunch of my classmates actually are doing killer things, including Francis D'Souza, who I believe is now moving over to CBC very soon. And then also Cabral Richards, who is Cabby on the street and Cabby from TSN. So he and I are buds. That's cool. I love Cabby. Yeah, he actually calls me Janet. He doesn't call me Kelly. Is that on purpose? That's because of my love of Janet Jackson. So he never calls me Kelly. It's always Janet. I actually have that down. We're going to get to that. Talk a little bit about call screening because I think it's rather lost. And when you try to explain to people what it is and how it makes a talk show great, people just don't understand And I feel like this is a long conversation about what the call screener really does. Can you walk me through what the call screener does and what makes a good one?
Obviously, I think when you first start call screening, depending on your personality, you're a bit shy and it's awkward because you have to pepper the caller with questions, first of all, to find out if they're crazy, because there are a bunch of those. And so you have to weed through really quickly to find out, if they've got something valid to say. You also want to find out if they are repetitive callers. It's great to have repetitive callers, but not when it's always like Bob from NDG who's going to complain about the same thing 9 times in a month. I think you have to get over that very quickly. You have to and for me, it's funny. I'm such a farm kid where it's like I'm super shy, or I was when I was a kid. And then the way my dad brought us up was to always like respect your elders and all that kind of stuff. So for me to have to be a bit more assertive with callers, especially when they're rambling on, it took a little while, but you have to do that. You have to say, like, what's your point? And what do you want to say? And when he asks you how you're doing, get right to your point and all that kind of stuff. It is a bit of a stressful situation when you first start doing it, but then you kind of get into a rhythm. And then almost like you pride yourself on making sure you're putting on the right calls on the air. And there's nothing worse than getting a glare from the host when the caller is either unbalanced or completely flips the script on them. So you never want that. I remember getting a glare a couple of times and like you just want to fall underneath the console. So it's a skill, that's for sure.
Who gave you the glare?
I think I'll leave that one alone because she's probably listening.
All right. Well, you said she, so yeah. You've narrowed it down by half.
I've narrowed it down. And it's funny because you really too want to make sure, I loved being on talk radio because you really become a family, like a team when you're on your show. So like I was, super invested in John and our, producer, like our tech producer, like we were a family. I felt like I was a family with this guy named Pez, who was the tech producer for Christina Chernesky's show. And it's just, you really want to make sure you're always doing the best for them so that you're doing the best for the stations. It's almost like really being on a team, and I'm big about team sports. So I think that's why it hit close to home for me.
When did you first wind up on the air?
So my first real attempt on the air was on CFRB. They let us have this little segment called The Jukebox on Christina Chernesky's show. And so Pez and I, the tech op, were both heavily into music. And he actually to this day is like a music producer and all that sort of good stuff. And so we used to put together this like 90-second package for Christina about some upcoming music of the week or what was happening around town in Toronto. And I think if memory serves, we also would sort of feature 1 or 2 new artists and what they'd sort of put out. And I was just gleeful the moment that she allowed us to play that on her show. And it was just such a groundbreaking thing for me. And then also she was really kind and she let me come on to sort of do entertainment stuff for her on the weekends where we would talk about, let's say, an upcoming music award show or what have you. And that was my first real, on air in Toronto. And it was an amazing experience for me.
How'd you find your way back to Montreal?
It's funny because I was getting to the age where I was like, I really want to be closer to my family, especially if I meet that special person. And so I didn't know if I wanted to meet that special person in Toronto. And then also I really felt like I'd have more opportunity to probably get on the air back in Montreal. And so a position came up at K103 in Ganawage, which is just south of Montreal. And it was a great position because I was going to be doing technical stuff on the back end, like doing producing commercials and all that sort of stuff. But I managed to tell the program director, I said, would you please give me a show as well? And so she agreed to do that. So I moved back home to Montreal in 2004 and started at K103. And because it's such a small community station, I learned how to do everything. I was producing commercials. I was writing the copy. I ended up on the morning show, producing that. Then I was a member of the morning show. Then I still had my show every Friday nights called Soul Sessions. That was all like Motown music and disco, and it was amazing. I loved that show. It was so much fun to do. Then I remember was really no one else except for me and the program director who would do anything to keep the radio station on the air, because sometimes we had problems with our computer system. So I remember being there at like 1 a.m. with my program director, Kristen Jerome, and we were like blowing out computers trying to make sure that we could get them back on the air. It was quite the experience, and I learned a lot. I learned also to deal with clients because I was having to call them up and play commercials for them and see if they were happy with what we'd produced. Actually, at K103, they have this thing called Radio Bingo every Friday night as well. After my show would end at 8 o'clock, and so we would be producing all these commercials for or bingo promos, as we called it, and it was just like we had the best time writing bingo commercials or bingo promos. And so that was like our Friday night hangout, was writing the bingo promo for the next week.
And then I think you found your way back into Fort Street and doing some work there. Yes? No?
Yes, I did. I actually got brought back over to CJAD to be the weekend traffic reporter. Mike Bendixen got the job to come from Toronto because Mike and I actually worked together at CFRB as producers. He was the morning show producer at CFRB when I was there. And I would often fill in for him on the morning show when he was on vacation. And so we became buds. And then when he came to Montreal, I was super happy for him because he was like one of the youngest program directors ever, I think, at CFR or CJAD. He was really sweet and asked me to come back and do some work over there. So that was my situation over there, was to be on traffic.
I remember one of the comments when Mike got hired, and he's going to be program director of CJAD in Montreal. I think he's all of 26 years old.
Yeah, he was young.
And somebody commented to me, "Really? I've got wine older than that."
Yeah, I think he proved them quite wrong because he's done amazing things, and obviously now back at Toronto at CFRB and killing it. So I'm proud of Mike.
There was no doubt from the first time I met Mike that he was going to be one of the best program directors, and it was going to be a lifelong thing for him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And when did you find your way on to being a jock in a music station?
I really wanted to be on the air, and I kept harassing. The program director of Mix. I was like, please just give me a chance. Please just give me a chance. And so they finally put me on Saturday morning, I think it was. It was either Saturday or Sunday morning from like 6 to 9. And I was just gleeful to be able to be on Mix 96, especially because my love of Mix 96 goes all the way back to when I was 15 years old, when it actually signed on as Mix 96. I remember Terry and Ted, who are obviously legendary announcers here in Montreal, and they were coming over to be the morning team. And I still remember exactly where I was when they signed on as Mix 96. And I was a huge fan of theirs, a huge fan of the station. And so when I cracked the mic the first time on Mix 96, it was like everything had come full circle for me. So it did not matter that I was on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. I was on Mix 96, and it was a huge accomplishment for me, and I was very humbled by it.
You've done just about every shift at 95.9 ever invented. Do you ever feel like you've been over-shuffled in the Virgin Radio 95.9 deck?
Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes at the time it's frustrating, especially if you're enjoying the shift that you're on. But I think it's the nature of the beast to be moved around depending on who the program director is and what they feel the direction of the station needs to be and all that sort of stuff. So I know initially when I was younger, it was like a personal affront to me, I think, to be moved around. But as time marches on, you're just so happy. I think if you really have radio in your blood, you are very happy anytime you get to crack a microphone. And I'm a big team player. And like I said, it is such an honor that I'm still on Virgin. I still can't believe it when I see the 95.9. Like, it's just like, wow, it's such a thrill for me.
Coming up in just a second, Kelly shares the secret behind a successful digital footprint, her YouTube channel, her podcast, and how to be a great interviewer. She also tells us what it was like to meet another one of her heroes, Janet Jackson. Well, you came by my office, but you didn't ask for an on-air position.
I should have.
I think you were so excited to be a part of Mix 96, you didn't even bother to ask to be on show. But you did leave me something on my desk once.
What did I leave you?
You left me a half-hour sample of the Kelly Alexander Show. It was 2005, and you said you were going to put it into podcast form.
Right.
And I think you were actually distributing it in podcast form, and I looked at it and I said, oh, it's got some music in it. It's not. It feels like radio, but it's not really sort of what a podcast is. And I sort of left it on the corner of my desk, but I kind of wish I kept it now because I want to talk about where you've gone, and you've sort of gone outside of radio to find all these other amazing platforms to spread the Kelly Alexander Show.
Yeah, I wanted to do a podcast, and I guess I was one of the early bandwagon jumpers with it. And, because I love being on commercial radio. Like I said, I'm still a part of Virgin Radio, which was Mix 96. So it's still an honor for me to be a part of the team and also to be on CJAD. But the thing is like, as we all know with radio these days, you can't really do a lot of in-depth interviews. It's not, especially depending on the format. And obviously with the format that I'm on, it's mainly to pump out the new music and to get the songs out there and all that sort of stuff. So we don't have that ability to play these in-depth interviews. And I love interviewing. That is a calling for me in life. And so to be able to do the Kelly Alexander Show where I get to do in-depth interviews that could be 11 minutes, they could be 27 minutes. It just depends on what's going on. And so that's why the Kelly Alexander Show was launched. All these years later, 10 years later, actually, we're celebrating our 10th year in October of 2019. It's just amazing that I've been able to have so many wonderful guests on, including I'm a big fan of supporting up-and-coming Canadian talent. So I actually had Rhea May on the show about 6 months before she signed with Sony. And I told her at the time, I said, you are going to do well. This song is going to do well. And sure enough, I was so happy when I found out that she'd been signed. And I've had like Scott Hellman on the show and Tyler Shaw, and the list goes on. And then we've been fortunate to have people like Missy Elliott, who was recently on the show. And that was a huge thrill for me to get Missy on the show.
How does radio handle a big artist coming into the station versus the way you would handle it for your YouTube channel or for podcast?
I think it depends on who the artist is, of course, but I think that, obviously if it's a big artist, we still want to make sure that we get the content out of them and we try to have fun with them. Like usually it's an interview that is now not just audio. We are shooting video of it and it's going on our Facebook page and all that sort of stuff. So I know that we try to have a lot of fun with them, like, playing some like sort of trivia game with them or whatever that's going to relax them and let them have fun. So I think that's how we handle it on the radio, especially because we know we have time constraints. And then for me, for the podcast, I just know that I have usually more time with them. And I know I'm not constricted by, needing to be out in 2 minutes or what have you. So I just kind of want to always get their backstory and why they're doing what they're doing. And even asking them about their writing process and all that sort of stuff. And they seem to really enjoy that because I don't think they get those questions anymore. A lot of it's just very like on the top stuff, like tell us about your new single. And you kind of have to pump out 20 words or less, and I think they're kind of very well versed on that. And they know they have to be quick and it's sound bites. But with me, they get to have fun and I try to joke around with them and make them feel comfortable. And I think that's why I've been successful with some of the artists. Like I actually have audio of Lady Gaga telling me she doesn't want to leave. She wants to stay. She wants to have fun. And that was like such a huge thrill for me when I did that interview actually for Mix 96 years ago. Even just recently with like Missy Elliott, like she was happy to stay on. Like I probably could have had her for another 20 minutes. And that just like made my day that she was having such a great time on the show because I was asking things that I think they don't get asked.
It's sort of sad that interviewing has become a bit of a lost art because we don't do it on live radio anymore, but it's also a blessing that we've got podcasts and YouTube now to do long form.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the focus of the Kelly Alexander Show is I try to be the conduit between the fan and the artist. So if you are a hardcore fan of, let's say, we've had Melissa Etheridge on the show, we've had Katie Lang on the show, we've had Macy Gray on the show. Like if you're hardcore fans of these people, then hopefully you will get something out of my longer interviews with them. And actually it makes me so happy when I get a message on my YouTube channel from someone going, oh my God, Kelly, like, thank you for this. I didn't know about blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, okay, I've done my job.
I know it seems really rudimentary that I sort of sit here and say, well, this is sort of a lost art for interviewing, but we did lose a generation of people interviewing because radio stopped doing it. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, podcast has really caught up and is now serving the purpose for long form interviews.
I love interviews. I love either conducting them or listening to them. I just find it fascinating to hear what an artist has to say, whether it is, a mainstream artist or an up and coming artist, like I mentioned before, or even someone. I'm really big on behind the scenes people too. I really love knowing how things happen. Like, for example, I've had a choreographer on the show several times. Her name is Tina Landon, and she's choreographed for everybody. She actually is the choreographer who did the Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson Scream video back in 1995. And so to have her come on the show and spend like 45 minutes with me explaining what that situation was like and how she had to kind of manage the way Michael did things versus how Janet did things and to make that come together, to me, like, I am just gleeful because I'm like, this is stuff that people don't know about. And now they get to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So it means a lot to be able to do that.
Is now a good time to talk about your Janet Jackson problem?
Problem? Sure. I don't think it's a problem, but maybe some people do. Yeah.
Why do you love Janet Jackson so much?
Yeah, so it started when I was about 13. Like, I actually liked Janet when I was 9, you know, when her Control album was out and all that sort of stuff. But then I remember seeing her perform on the American Music Awards in 1990. And I don't know, Matt, it was just, to me, it was the most amazing performance I'd ever seen. I just thought she was fantastic. Like, she was dancing up a storm and she had amazing background dancers and like the song was great. And so from that moment on, that's when it all started. And I've just become a huge fan of hers, or I have been a huge fan of hers ever since. And I really love how she carries herself. I think she really cares about her fans. She always has great messages in her music. Obviously, everyone knows the importance of what she's done with Rhythm Nation. And I just think that she's such a positive influence for women. And even though I'm not, you know, a singer like her, I have taken so much from how she has barreled through the challenges and as well as the achievements that she's had throughout her career. And it was such an amazing experience. Back in March, I was able to finally meet her in person. Like, I'd met her quickly before back in 1998, but I actually got to meet her at her Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction.
Wow.
And it was amazing. It was just, and I have a picture with her and with the choreographer, Tina Landon. And to me, that is, I can't even put words to it. To be in a picture with these two women who I've looked up to since I was a teenager just means the world to me. And I love that when I did meet Janet this time around, where I actually had a couple of minutes with her, she gave me a firm handshake. She seemed truly invested in talking to me for those couple of minutes. And she was as great as I would have hoped her to be. And I just think that speaks volumes about who she is as a person.
Edit.
Now, a few weeks ago, I went online and solicited some questions from people. And one of the reasons I wanted to get Kelly onto this podcast episode was to answer this very question.
Hey, Maddie, it's Justin Marshall from Cool 101.3 in Bonnyville, Alberta. I spent the weekend looking into myself as a content creator, and I feel I need to expand my digital footprint. Do you have any ideas?
Thanks a lot for your question, Justin. And yes, I do have an answer. I want you to go pick up a pen and paper and take notes on what Kelly says in the next few minutes.
Edit.
It looks to me you've got a big YouTube channel.
Yep.
And by big, I mean, you've got 1,800 subscribers. That's big to me because I've got about 20. You've got a podcast.
Yep.
Do you have a second podcast with 90s Now?
I do. I have a second podcast that I do with, I think, one of your buddies, Sharon Hyland, who is on Shom. And she and I became friends around 2005, and we just have a great rapport. And I call her, actually, she calls herself my life coach. And I always tell her she's the life coach I never knew I wanted, but now have. And so we started this podcast back in 2012 because I'm a kid of the 90s. So I thought, I was like, we should do something with this. And so she was on board. And so we've been doing the podcast since 2012. And we actually have some ardent followers, especially because now the 90s are like the new 80s and everybody wants to sort of be involved in that and know what's going on. And so we just have the best time. We talk about artists and events that happened, in the 90s, like incidents or whatever. And then we talk about some of these artists now, like, I'll just give an example, like New Kids on the Block, like they're, back out on their mixtape tour, so they're still doing stuff. They're with Debbie Gibson and Tiffany. So we'll chat about that. We've talked a lot about Lenny Kravitz and like how he's still going on and all that kind of stuff. Like, and it's just amazing the support that we've gotten online for 90s Now. People love hearing about back in the day stuff and then what these artists are doing now. And we play trivia games and she teases me mercilessly about my Janet addiction, and it's just a lot of fun. And we actually have some fans that have messaged us from as far away as England and Texas, and they just say that we are a part of their weekly listening experience, and that means so much to us.
Do you find it hard managing two podcasts?
Yeah, there seems to not be enough hours in the day, but I get up really early, and so I try to get a bunch of stuff done in the morning if I can, and then try to manage things around my Virgin and CJAD career. And it seems to work. I just don't get to see my parents as much as I should, even though I live about 12 minutes away from them.
So what shifts are you doing on Virgin and what shifts are you doing on CJAD?
So CJAD, I do a lot of the paid programs. So I host usually at night, usually 7 to 8 or stuff or so. Now I host the Ultros, who you probably remember because I think they were still on the air, or they were on the air when you were still here. And so they're like cross-border lawyers. So we talk about, people moving back and forth to the States and Canada and how that needs to be handled. I also host a dermatology show. And then I have another financial show. And I have to tell you, Matt, it's funny because some of my friends are like, why are you hosting a financial show? But I have to tell you, like, I have learned so much by hosting these shows. I am way better now at handling my finances and my retirement plan because of hosting these shows. And it's funny because my financial advisor all of a sudden was like, why are you asking actual pertinent questions and stuff? And I'm like, well, because I've learned things now. And so I really love being on CJAD. I also do a segment every Tuesday with Aaron Rand, who's the Drive host. We do a thing called Tunes Day. So I bring out 3 new artists for him or music that's come out from artists. And then we also do like a Where Are They Now segment. And then I also fill in occasionally on CJAD, depending on if the nighttime host is off or not. And then on Virgin, I am the weekend afternoon announcer. I'm the swing announcer. And so I'm all over the place depending on what needs to be done. And I actually really enjoy being able to do all the different shifts because it's different audiences that you're talking to. And I pride myself on knowing that if I'm, filling in on the drive shift, that I have a certain set of people that are listening and I want to get them home in a good mood. So I tailor my content to that. Same thing if I'm in the morning or if I'm, on weekend afternoons. I know that a lot of listeners are more actively listening because they're not at work and they're out, driving to a hockey game or whatever. So I have the best time, on the weekends as well, because I just know people are in a better mood. And I have so much fun when we get to put callers on and all that sort of stuff. And it's just like yesterday, actually, funny enough, because the Spice Girls did their first concert in Ireland, and we had sent a winner over there to go to the show. And I had posted a picture on our Virgin Instagram saying, the girls had a great show last night and they're heading off to Wales. And then somebody actually messaged back on Instagram saying, you sent me, I'm so happy. And so I messaged her back privately and I said, can I get you on the air? I said, you're still over there now, right? She's like, yeah. So I called up Candy and we had a little chat, and she was just over the moon that she got to go, courtesy of Virgin, over to see the Spice Girls. And we had a great little chat, put it on the air in like under a minute, and it was awesome content. And I was so happy to have been able to do that. So that's what I love about radio too, is like you can plan, but then if things just kind of work out organically, that's amazing.
So talk a little bit about the setup you have for recording audio and doing your video stuff, because you do some video and you do some podcast stuff. So where do you record your podcasts?
So I have a home studio in my basement at home. So that's where I am right now. And so I have my microphone and my mixer all set up going to my computer. And I have like 2 or 3 computers. So it looks like I'm landing an airplane, but like one is for a lot of my YouTube work and all that. And then I have a computer that's basically dedicated to my audio work and stuff like that. So that's kind of the setup that I have going on. And then I also, when we head out on the road, because a lot of times we do some interviews in person, especially if like bands are coming into town. I guess it was a couple months ago, I had Serena Ryder on the show. And so she was at one of the venues in Montreal, the Corona Theatre. And so we went out there with my video team. And so we recorded her there and then had it edited and got it up on the YouTube channel. So that's kind of the setup. We have like a bit of a mobile setup, and then we have my setup here in studio.
Who's on the video team?
I have a couple people that I'm actually big on trying to get university students that are in that stream and wanting to head out to do either video or audio stuff. And so I usually have some contacts either at Concordia or what have you. I send out things like if I need one, because I've rotated a lot of interns, I guess we can say, over the years. And it's been beneficial for both of us because usually, they help me, which is what I need. And then I always make sure that if they do a good job for me, I write them an amazing reference letter. And I can't tell you how many times I've been contacted by this, that, and something else to say what a great job they've done. And then it helps them get into a program they're trying to get into. Or even one of my interns wanted to go and study abroad. And so I helped make sure that I did my part so that would happen for her. And so it's kind of like a reciprocal relationship. So right now I have a couple of university students that help me out.
Of course, after you go and put everything on YouTube or you put out a podcast, you have to market it. So do you have any marketing strategies for getting the word out there about your content?
It's hard because I just always feel like there's never enough time in the day to get everything done the way I would want. But yeah, I really try to make sure that we have a solid presence on our Facebook page and our Instagram and also on Twitter. And it's funny, a lot of my followers come to me through Twitter because I have a lot of Americans that actually listen to the show and they're big on Twitter. So I get a lot of the content out through Twitter. And then once you sort of get it into a fan base's reality, they will then retweet it out for you. And then it's crazy how much it can actually take off for you. So I'm a big fan of Twitter, even though I think a lot of people in Canada aren't sort of like obsessed with it, but I think a lot of Americans are. And so it helps me out quite a bit.
If you have content that is media related, whether you're talking about digital or podcast and broadcast like we are now, or anything that is consumed digitally like music, Twitter works. And I know it doesn't work for a lot of entrepreneurs and for a lot of people who have other forms of podcasting, but anything involving media consumption seems to work on Twitter. It's promoted very well.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know once we had an interview that we did with Mariana's Trench, and their fans are called Trenchers, and they just got it into their reality and their ether, and it just went. And it was incredible how many hits we got on our YouTube channel for that interview. So I'm very grateful to Twitter for all the help it has brought our show.
What do you use to record audio?
Adobe Audition.
And video?
Premiere. Yeah, we do a lot of the editing on Premiere.
What other secrets are you willing to part with?
What secrets am I? I think something that is very important that not a lot of people invest in, but I think you do, Matt, because I think I've heard you talk about it before, is editing. Like, make your podcast tight. Don't just treat it like you are in your mom's basement, rattling out whatever, and then you're going to post it. I think editing and making sure it sounds tight. And also, it's funny because I know that I think some of the love for podcasts was like, oh, it's, it doesn't have to be professional. It's all just, we're just talking or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but if you can have a few elements to make it sound big, bad, and vicious, do that, because you just give yourself an extra platform to sound credible and enticing. So I'm very big on us having not over the top production or anything, but I just want to make sure that everything sounds tight and that there's a few audio elements here and there to like push an interview forward or what have you. And I just think that that's really important, because why bake the cake if you're not going to put the icing on properly? I'm certain you've had a chance to work with Valerie Geller before. Yeah, I believe back actually when you were still with us. I think she came in once or twice, and I really enjoyed having her chat to us. I've always had her in the back of my mind. When I started to do podcasts, she said, anything you can record, you can always make better. Mm-hmm. And that's why I got into editing, these shows tightly to the best of my abilities, because it really does come down to the listener. You want to make a good listener experience. And I know that everybody who listens to this podcast especially, they don't have a lot of time. And they certainly don't want to hear us sitting around talking about nothing. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to think that what we've spoken about on today's podcast was relevant, and they made it to the end of the podcast. I hope so, too. Kelly, it's been great talking to you. The Kelly Alexander Show is phenomenal. I love what you're doing. Long-form interview with big artists. It resides in podcast form and also in YouTube form. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate your support. You've always been behind me, and it means a lot. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Sound Off Podcast. Find us online at soundoffpodcast.com and connect with us wherever great social media is housed. The show is imaged using the sounds from Core Image Studios.
Written and hosted by Matt Kundle.
A production of the Sound Off Media Company.